welcome back. I'm Tedward, and today, thanks to Bond Group in Waltham, Massachusetts, we get the pleasure of driving this beautiful 2009 Aston Martin DBS. It has a 5.9-liter naturally aspirated V12 mated to a manual 6-speed transaxle. So this is the real deal, the best expression of this car. Made famous, of course, by 007 flipping it in Casino Royale. We're not going to be doing anything quite that crazy today. I hope it looked safe enough in the film, but I don't want to find out. I believe this is the same color as that car as well, which is pretty cool. So this definitely has all the chops of being a proper gentleman's grand tour with all of the speed. It makes 510 horsepower. It is lighter than the DB9 that it is based on by about 66 pounds, partially because of a carbon fiber bonnet, carbon boot lid, carbon ceramic brakes, some carbon bits on the doors and things like that. But 66 pounds doesn't sound like a lot, but these are luxury cars. They've got to put so much leather and stuff in these things to make their customers feel special that when you need to start pulling weight, it can be tricky. So we'll appreciate that as it is, but DBS always gets me going. The first thing that I notice, other than the gorgeous carbon lip spoilers, is this hood. You get the 4 sort of nostrils here, and that rang true in DB11 later on because you could tell the V8 DB11s from the V12 DB11s by the number of hood vents. The V12s had 4, the V8s had 2. And sure, you can go out and buy the newest, latest, and greatest, but I do think that this is probably the best looking modern Aston out there. So let's take a look around. First, I want to show you under the hood. And before we get under the hood, you'll notice the black badge. Black badges are usually reserved for special models. DB models, the David Brown Special from the late 60s, early 70s, got a black badge, and we have it here today. Red is for Zagato, green is for all of the pedestrian Astons, but that's all right. Under here, hand-built in England, final inspection by Mick Freeman, another Mick Freeman car. We've had lots of those on the channel. And there is our 6-liter badged V12. However, we know better, it's a 5.9. But man, 6.0 sure does look good on that intake. Now, 85% of the weight of the DBS is between the axles, so it's fairly balanced and ready to handle. But of course, this obviously being a fairly long wheelbase front engine Grand Tour is designed for covering incredible distances at an alarming rate of speed. Let's take a look around back, because back here, first we have the gorgeous taillights. We get the little duck tail on this deck lid, black badge of course, and down here the incredible carbon rear diffuser. I think that looks so good. And then you can jump into our trunk, reasonable trunk space for a few bags, and in the back seat you actually have some room there as well. Familiar door handles, of course, and in the rear we do not have any back seats. They look like back seats. They are not. This is a 2-seater model, and this is just there basically to block your stuff from falling out. It would be nice if this was all sort of flat and then you'd have more usable space, but of course you need to make room for a torque tube to go back to that transaxle. I think the pedal box in this car looks really good with the aluminum pedals with the little rubber dots on them for grip. Very cool. This one has 20,000 miles on it, so the owner certainly enjoyed it. This is going to be going up for sale very soon. To get our Aston started, very similar to all the VH platform cars that we've driven in the past, we have the ugly key right now. Normally this has like the stainless steel and glass, which looks gorgeous plugging into here, but alas, we have plastic, which looks crummy. And it's funny because pretty much all the new Aston Martins get crummy looking keys now too. They need to step up their game. Foot on the clutch. Hard not to love the starter sound of a big V12. Oh, okay. So let's close our swan doors, littered in carbon fiber, and take it for a ride. Our handbrake down here, you'll notice, is engaged despite being down. The trick to these, you pull up, button, down, and then it's off. There you go. And then we have a manual 6-speed transmission. No fancy dogleg 7-speed here, and I appreciate that because I do think that the dogleg in the new Aston Martins are just too busy. They don't add up to me. Even the V12 Vantage has that. It's just not my favorite. I think proper 6-speed does the job. We've got our familiar sounding V12. Not shouty, but certainly lets people know you've arrived. And the clutch in these cars notoriously catches high. So that's not everybody's favorite thing. I know everybody wants a manual Aston, but it's right at the top of that clutch travel. And that's true for DB9s and Vantages as well. Get her off the line. Loads and loads and loads of torque from this engine, and it builds power well into the top of the rev range. It is actually much faster than you would anticipate it's going to be. This thing really books. Now, it's got carbon ceramic brakes, which are fantastic, but this is 2009 carbon ceramic brakes from Aston Martin. They need a little bit of heat, just a little bit of heat to really start building. I mean, they're not like faded and gone when you dip into the pedal, but they don't throw you through the windshield right off the bat. So you just need to be a little bit cognizant of that fact when you go for them. On the highway, it feels right at home. It's a little stiff, but I had the adaptive damper system on, so we can soften it up just a little bit, but it's always giving you feedback. And one of my favorite things about this car is the steering. You've got a beautiful hydraulic steering system that tells me all the information about the texture of the road and the grip of the front tires. This is something that I'm appreciating more and more and more as we go forward. I mean, of course, there was this big upset when Porsche went to electric power assist systems, and people went a little nuts, but we've all adapted to them because they're in all of our cars now. It's not simply like, ooh, some fancy thing Porsche did that took away some of the steering feedback. Now, when you get into any of these cars that have kind of like an old school hydraulic rack, they feel so good. You almost don't know how much you appreciate these steering systems until you go back to them and remember, like, man, that's what this used to feel like. How wonderful. If this fella loads a room. Lamborghini Aventadors make that exact same sound, like new SVJs. That 2.3 is something really special. Third gear, you get into third, and that's when you've really started to stretch its legs a little bit. And it just feels like it's gonna pull like a freight train. The shifter feel is really nice. It's luxurious. It's not like a notchy thing. It's got like, it's well damped, but not in a way that makes you feel rubbery. You know, BMW shifters have sort of a rubbery feel. This has a very like solid machined feel, but without any of the sort of like metallic interference, like, you know, ka-think into the thing, into the gates. Interior noise, a little loud, but what I would expect from the fancy lightweight version of the car. So certainly no qualms with that. Easy to rev match, and the clutch is incredibly forgiving. It's relatively light and somewhat soft. Like it's not like a stage 3 clutch that's just gonna grab and hit. It definitely gives you a little bit of leniency and leeway to get nice smooth engagements. Have to rev it in the tunnel because We are children. Oh man, that third gear really does pull like a freight train. That's incredible. And then, certainly not surreptitious, but in a classy way, we merge our way back into normal traffic. And it's so easy to drive in traffic because of the torque. Now, if memory serves, driven quite a few DB9s, this feels sharper. It feels a little more dialed. It feels, not that a DB9 is sloppy in any way, but it feels like it's a little tighter. And I like that about this car because it feels confident in what you're doing with it. You feel like you can apply throttle, and even though the rear end might get a touch squirrely, it stays planted, and I know where it's going to go. And this long wheelbase allows you to kind of exercise that power to the rear wheels without fear that it's going to snap on you. Seats are so supportive. I've got nice side bolsters, but they're not tight on me. I mean, I'm a skinny dude, but like I've got a little bit of room, so I think some larger folks could fit in this nicely and still have good lateral support in a corner. It's really important in a car like this because when you're flopping around, you can almost feel like you have a lack of control just because you're not fixed in the car. So these seats do a great job of fixing you in the vehicle. It weighs 3,700 pounds, so it's not a lightweight, but it's still lighter than like an E39 M5. So it's not heavy. It's kind of this in-betweener, but that's what I think gives it that sweet spot as a Grand Tour, because you don't want a super lightweight car doing 200 miles an hour down the motorway. You want something to have a little bit of heft to make sure that it stays planted. Suspension-wise, certainly feel everything in the road, but not in an aggressive and unpleasant way. More in a, I'm certainly aware that the road has texture and what I've just run over. Oh, I'm just really into this gearbox. This is one of the few manual Aston Martins that I genuinely adore. Had issues with them in the past because sometimes the throttle tuning is a little off, and I still don't love the throttle tuning in this car. It's good, not great, but it's more intuitive than I was anticipating. I didn't have to adapt to this car like I've had to adapt to some of the Vantages in the past, or even manual DB9. The high bite point on the clutch, you get used to it, and it's not really a point against it. It actually kind of makes it an easier drive. You just have to be aware of it. Love the front end of this car. It's really direct. There's zero play in the steering, not that you would expect it, but it just darts in exactly where and when you want it. The driving experience, I think, is what you're paying for here. The engine, of course, definitely high on the list of exciting features of the vehicle, but some things on the car, we have just enough torque to get around this fella. There we go. Dart into that corner. What a beautiful thing. There's a couple things that I don't love. Some of the touch points are chintzy. I mean, this blinker stock, the wiper stock, even like where you turn the headlights on, cheap, like real cheap, like bargain basement Ford Chevy cheap. What a bummer. That should be like beautiful aluminum with a nice click or something, not like chintzy plastic. Like, what a bummer for a 200 grand, you know? I would have been really disappointed with that if I got in this car and just paid all that money and that's what I got. But then again, this car has a bit of that, hey, you're driving an Aston. People are going to look at you, and very few of them know that you have cheap blinker stocks. So just keep that to yourself and carry on looking like a boss. So there you have it, the Aston Martin DBS. I think it's a cohesive driving experience, which is unlike some of the manual Astons I've driven in the past. Sometimes I feel like it's very discoordinated between throttle, clutch, and shifter, where you've got to pull out of that throttle super early so you don't spike the revs, and then everything just kind of falls apart. You've got to think too hard in some of those other cars, whereas in DBS, I feel like they did a pretty darn good job tuning this to be a driver's car that's intuitive. That is my main takeaway. Now, unfortunately, it has some chintzy interior bits that are not my favorites, like these blinker stocks, some of the controls, you know, stuff, just typical Aston stuff where, you know, you'd think if you were paying 200 grand for a car, everything would be perfect in aluminum. But no, sometimes it is cheap off-the-shelf stuff from lower brands just to get it done, just to get it in there. And not my favorite, but very survivable, given the fact that I'm sure these have depreciated and you can pick them up for slightly less than what you would have paid new. And despite being over 10 years old, this thing is fast. Like, it really moves. This V12 will not disappoint you. It is not the screaming banshee of a V12 that you would get from Ferrari or Lamborghini, but it is certainly an exotic and exciting feeling powertrain. I love it. I like it. I would drive this all the time if I could afford the fuel, because I have drank quite a lot in a very small amount of time. So, thanks to Bond Group for tossing me the keys to the DBS. Thank you guys so much for watching, liking, commenting, and subscribing. Don't forget to respect the drive, whether you're driving a Tercel or a DBS. And I'll see you in the next one. Ooh, look at this Saab. Man, I love a 900. That guy is the most Saab driver I've ever seen. He looks like he's been driving that Saab since new, and he probably has.